So yeah, as per the title of this video, I did a thing. I don't know if you guys know this, but I can do things. If you're somebody who followed me back in the day, then you know that I used to do like art videos. I think I used to do some woodworking, but not much. So I want to get this out of the way first and foremost. If you're watching this as like a how-to video that you found on YouTube, not a good idea. This is going to be mostly for entertainment purposes. I do want to eventually come back and explain how to do things, but I think I would have to do that when I have like the time, the money, the resources to actually thoroughly go through things. Because right now, I would not recommend doing anything the way that I do it. But with all that being said, I've just kind of wanted to make project videos because not only is it content that I find entertaining to watch people make things, even though I don't really know if I watch people do woodworking, but also in the past I've had people ask me, oh, how did you build that bookshelf? How did you build that cabinet thing? How did you build that table? And anytime I've tried to give an answer, it's usually just like, I took pieces of wood and put them together. And I don't know how to explain it any better than that, so let me just show you my process. First, I went ahead and I got the wood that I was going to use. For the tabletop itself, I used this old flooring that I got when I helped someone remodel a room. I went ahead and used these planks of wood over the others that I have because I really prefer the color. And I also went ahead and got more pieces of wood than I would probably need, because I'm going to have to cut them to shape, which means they're going to get shorter this way. I don't know how to explain it. Like, the length that's the forward and back of the table. But other than that, all I really did was cut this one plank of wood because it was a bit janky, and I didn't want to give myself splinters on it. But once that was done, I went ahead and took it to the table saw, which I wasn't too happy about, because for one, it's the only tool here that I had to borrow. This isn't actually my table saw, and as such, I really don't like to talk bad about it because beggars can't be choosers, but like, it's just kind of garbage. It never really cuts anything straight, which isn't necessarily all the fault of the table saw itself, because obviously these planks are not straight, but I just sort of had to make do with what I had. So I went ahead and cut these all lengthwise. Once I was done, I laid them all out. Some boards I got lucky with, some I definitely did not. But generally the idea here is just to work with what you have. So here I am just sort of laying these out and seeing which ones lay best flush with each other. I'm just trying to see which ones lay together best to make a flat surface with no gaps, so that way I don't have to do more work trying to make them fit together. Because honestly, this is my least favorite part of woodworking, planing. Especially since I just have a handheld planer. For example, I tried to use clamps, but that just quickly devolved because this table wouldn't stop wobbling around. And so I mostly just held the boards and tried to plane them down to a flat surface. That worked well for most of the boards, but there was one where I just really screwed the pooch. Because, like, honestly, there's not much rhyme or reason to what I'm doing here. My best advice here is just to try to focus on areas where the boards are touching and leaving a gap on other parts of the board. And if you look down the line and there's no part where the boards are touching, but there's still a gap in between the boards, that means that, like me, you pulled a whoopsie and you cut at an angle, so it's touching on the bottom. But other than that, I don't really know what good advice to give you here, because obviously I like cut off half of this board and sweat like a pervert doing it. You think pecs are gonna be cool until you like look like you're lactating. And so not only was that demoralizing, but once I put them all together, it did not fit well at all, and I was a little frustrated. You know, if you can't tell from this video. And it was especially frustrating not only that my planer sucked and like I couldn't actually do this because of the wobbling, but now I had to glue these boards together on a flat surface, which is kind of the point of why I'm making this table. I don't have a flat surface. So I threw all the boards down on the ground because that was like the best option I had. I went ahead and applied glue to all of the parts where the boards would touch each other, and then I put cardboard underneath so I wouldn't get any glue on my bungee straps or on the floor. And then I put straps around the board so that way the bond would be stronger. I also put weights on the board so that way the bungee straps wouldn't buckle the boards and make it, not flat, because that's kind of the goal, is to have a flat surface. The next day I took all of that off and I had a pretty solid but not yet flat surface. So that meant that I had to go ahead and start planing for hours and hours and hours on end. The technique here is to sort of go diagonally. At least I think that's what works best for me. I don't know if that's the proper technique, but I just felt that that was the best way to catch the edges of the board to actually make them level with each other. Obviously, you don't want to go horizontally though, because that will splinter the wood when you're going perpendicular to the wood grain. Eventually, I got a pretty level surface, but the paint still wasn't really coming off all too well. But I had an idea, so I went ahead and got a Dremel that I had bought recently. Although when I brought out the Dremel, I also realized that I had a blister, so I went ahead and took care of that. And then I tried to set the Dremel up with like a metal brush, the kind that you use to sort of polish metal, I guess. Not polish it, but like you understand if you know the tool. But I was confused because it didn't really fit for the set that I had, even though it came with the set. So I eventually tried to use this instead. I don't know what you would call it, like a conical burr. It did not work, like even remotely. And then I tried to use this thing that I bought recently. I don't know what you would call it. I think it's just another burr. I think they're all burrs, right? But yeah, it didn't work either. And so then I went ahead and got my drill, being the genius that I am, and I tried to drill with the metal brush again, but that didn't work out. So after making a fool of myself for about like 30 minutes straight, I decided that I was just going to have to sand it all down. That worked the best, but it didn't completely get rid of all of the paint. But I just sort of had to accept that I wasn't going to get rid of all of it and move on. I proceeded to cut off the edges of the board which I had left on previously because I wanted to be able to adjust the board to make sure that it fit together the best. In other words, I was lazy, so I just wanted to slide the boards back and forth until I got a position that they all worked. Because if you can't tell, I don't like try too hard. Here I am basically just eyeballing what is square, because I'm sure you could like use a compass or something in order to figure out like the center of the surface and then try to perfectly square it up from there. But call me a pessimist or what you will, but I've just kind of accepted that Murphy's Law is a thing, so you might as well not even try. I then cut the boards, which was exhausting because it kept wiggling with every single move. And look at that, would you believe that the cut I made with an unstable table and a crappy handsaw isn't straight? I tried to plane the edge, but that's kind of a dumb idea since you're going against the grain. And then I tried everything else, the Dremel kind of worked, but I just eventually had to sand it down. Here I used the sanding block to sort of take off the splinters on the edges, because that's typically what sanding blocks are good for. And once I had a straight quote-unquote edge, I didn't have to guess as much. I measured it out and then I cut the next edge, which was a cleaner cut. I don't know if that was just luck or patience or a combination of the two. That just left these long edges which needed to be squared, and so I leveled them out with a planer. And then I was more or less done with like the structure of the tabletop. As you can see, this one is really good, that one's okay, that one's okay, that one is just unacceptably awful. So I went ahead and filled in the cracks with some wood glue, and I mixed in some sawdust on the surface of that. I went ahead and scraped off the excess, but I wouldn't recommend it because, how do I say this? The wood glue sawdust mixture was kind of like the consistency of a clay or of a dough. So if you've ever like tried to scrape that, you know how it just kind of crumbles? That's what it did, which obviously is not what we want because then that takes away sawdust and wood glue out of the cracks. So I eventually added more sawdust and wood glue back, and then once it was dry, I tried to plane it down, but that just kept taking chunks out of the table instead of like actually leveling it off. So once again, it was time to just sand it down to the best of my ability. And once it had been sanded like at least 3 times by now, right? It was time to do all of that again. Although thankfully I wasn't going to put as much attention into this other side, because I just needed to make sure that it wouldn't give me splinters if I touched the bottom of the desk. So once I was done, all I had to do was apply, is it finish or stain? I don't really... It's a really old recipe for making a wood sealant. You can probably find it online. It's like equal parts paint thinner, wax, and linseed oil. I just went with that because I like its look a lot better, and it's a lot cheaper to make than going out and buying, for example, polyurethane. And for those of you following along at home, yes, that is in fact a McDonald's napkin that I'm using to apply it. I was unhappy with the paint that was still left on the board, but I guess I could tell people that like I was going for a rustic look, which we all know is a lie, it's just an example of my incompetence. But once I was done with that, it was time to actually make the rest of the table with just pallet wood. First, I tried to use a crowbar to take apart the pallets, and then I used a hammer and a screwdriver, which doesn't make any sense because I have a chisel. But none of that really worked all too well, and the crowbar kind of damaged the wood since I kept hitting it like a moron. Eventually, I got the right tools for the job, a pry bar and a mallet, but even that didn't go so well. It went better, but eventually I had to just try to brute force it and pull the pieces apart by hand, which I did for pretty much all of the parts on these boards with the exception of like 2, and I also ended up pinching myself like really bad. And then after that, getting the nails out was frustrating at first since they were on both sides, but then it was pretty easy once I got rid of that one. I thought that these other boards would take even longer than the ones that I just did, but thankfully they kind of just chipped apart. Unfortunately, the nails did the same. They chipped apart. I tried to pull them out at first, but I quickly became really impatient and just hammered them all in quite angrily. After that, it was just more sanding, not really as much planing. Only these boards really needed to be planed because I didn't want to waste so much time trying to, sand that down. And then, I removed some staples, whatever. It's all just a matter of processing. Pallet wood, which you obviously don't have to do if you go and buy wood. The skinnier pallet boards are back supports. They are the length of the table plus the width of the legs. Obviously, these bigger boards are the legs. And then I had to go ahead and make table supports, which apparently I didn't record cutting them. But unsurprisingly, even though I spent 30 minutes trying to make sure that everything was perfect, the table saw that I hate didn't cut these two to equal widths. So I decided that I had to do what I probably should have done from the start and cut the entire length of the board by hand. They weren't equal, but they were definitely better than what the table saw did. Probably within a quarter of an inch. So once I had those done, all I had to do then was place the tabletop on the supports, and I actually went ahead and glued them together, which I don't usually do. Usually screws are good enough to hold boards together on their own, but I just figured that if I wasn't going to screw each individual board that made up the tabletop, I should probably try to glue them onto the supports. And then here I pre-drilled holes and I pre-drilled inlets for the heads. If you don't know, you need to pre-drill holes for screws because if you don't, they will kind of rip apart the wood grain since they're going against the wood grain. So after that, I put in the screws and I did the same for the other side. Once I was done with that, I had pretty much all of the boards to the shape that I needed them to be, because a lot of those pallet boards I didn't even bother cutting because they were already a length that was good enough. So I applied the linseed oil wax mixture to all of the boards, and I applied a second coat to the tabletop, which is why I applied a first coat earlier. And then once that was all dry, I went ahead and moved it up to my room where I was going to set it up. And I did this for the same reason that there's not really much to talk about after this point, because I didn't measure a single thing. I live in a fun house with floors that aren't level, so if I want my table to be level, it has to not be level, if you understand what I'm saying there. I did measure the height of the cross supports, and it was very frustrating because the yardstick kept falling over and, I'm trying to hold everything. I just don't have any room to do anything. And then on top of all that, the battery to my camera died, so yay! Go ahead and forgive the grainy footage here, because when I finished this up it was night and my camera is terrible at recording at night, but all I'm doing here is drilling in holes so I can put in these bolts. The bolts go through the legs of the table and then into the cross beams that are underneath the tabletop. This connects the tabletop to the legs of the table, and there we go. We've completed the table. The reason I chose to use bolts is so that way I could take the bolts out and I could adjust the height of the table or even change its angle later on, which I would show you what that looks like, but that right there is my drill bit. Yeah, the drill is just such a wonderful invention, isn't it? My favorite part is that the industry standard is to just burn the skin on your hands. I'm sure the technology doesn't exist. For example, if I take it off of drill and I put it onto any of these numbered settings that specify its torque, and then I go like this, and then it stops torquing, maybe we could just put something in there, because my hand isn't a complicated mechanism. Maybe we just put something in there that catches the drill, so that way all you have to do is flick a lever and then it catches this part, and so it just turns until it over torques and grabs onto the bit, and then there you go. I don't have to burn my hand. Seriously, stupid people just run the world, don't they? Because I hadn't used that bit yet, so these bits, when they are fresh out of the box, are just drenched in oil. I don't even, why do you blue bits? Why do you blue bits? Bluing, for those who don't know, is turning them black. It's giving them that protective coating. But, for what? For when I leave my bits out in the rain? What's the point of it? It just, it pisses me off. Everything pisses me off. It's frustrating. If anyone knows how to get a bit out of a piece of wood, let me know. And also, if you guys want to see more content like this, let me know. I want to do projects every once in a while, but I don't know if you could kind of pick up on this, at least for this kind of project, even though it's something I like to do, even though I think it's something that could be entertaining. I don't really know how to make it into a video, because it's just how do you make shelves, tables, and chairs? You take wood and you screw it together, and that's it.